Hey everyone, hope you're doing well. If you're using this to fall asleep, get cozy and relax. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. Alright, let's get into the story. When I was 12 years old, my life was shaped by chaos I couldn't control. My mom was caught in a toxic relationship with a man I'll call Ian, a cruel, abusive drunk who left scars on our home and our lives. Their fights were explosive, shattering any sense of peace. Ian's violence had destroyed both the front and back doors of our house, kicking them in during his rages. The doors were never fixed, leaving our home exposed, vulnerable to anyone who might wander in. My mom and Ian spent their days and nights at the bar, drowning in alcohol, leaving me and my 10-year-old brother alone in a house that felt more like a trap than a sanctuary. This story takes place on a night that still haunts me, a night that changed how I see safety, trust, and the fragility of childhood. My little brother was frail, always sick, his body weakened by constant illness and asthma that could spiral into terrifying attacks. At 12, I was small for my age, barely able to protect myself, let alone him. But I was all he had in those moments when the world turned dark. It was around midnight or 1 a.m., and my brother and I were holed up in his bedroom, the door closed, playing a game on his PlayStation. The glow of the screen and the hum of the console were our escape from the emptiness of the house. We were laughing, lost in our little world, when a strange noise cut through the air. It was faint but wrong, something unnatural that made my skin prickle. My brother didn't seem to hear it, and I didn't want to scare him. He was so fragile, emotionally and physically, and I knew how easily fear could trigger his asthma. So I played it off, keeping my voice light. "Hey, I'm gonna grab us some drinks," I said, forcing a smile. "Stay here, okay? I'll bring you something good." Before I left, that uneasy feeling gnawed at me, a sense of dread I couldn't shake. I glanced at my brother, his small frame curled up on the floor, and knew I had to protect him without letting him see my fear. "Why don't you work on our fort in the closet?" I suggested, keeping my tone playful. "Make it awesome for when I get back with snacks." It was a trick to get him to hide without alarming him. He loved our forts, and the closet felt like a safe place to tuck him away. He nodded, oblivious of the danger I sensed, and scurried into the closet with a blanket, eager to build. The layout of our house made checking on things risky. Opening the front door put you right in the living room, with the back door visible straight ahead. To the right was a hallway leading to the bedrooms, where we were. The kitchen, where I was headed, was behind the living room, meaning I'd have to walk past both open doors to get there. Every step felt like a gamble. As I crept out of my brother's room, the strange noises grew louder. Scrapes, thumps, sounds that didn't belong in the quiet of the night. My heart pounded, but I forced myself to stay calm for his sake. I told myself I was just being paranoid, but the dread in my gut told me otherwise. I moved down the hallway as quietly as I could, my bare feet cold against the floor, my breath shallow. The air felt heavy, like the house itself was holding its breath. Before I reached into the hallway, I heard it, a sound that froze my blood. It was a man's voice, low and guttural, like a growl. It wasn't human, not entirely. It was deep, primal, and it carried a weight that made my stomach churn. I felt like I might vomit from the fear that washed over me, pinning me in place. I was alone, completely alone. My dad lived in another state. My mom was at the bar, probably too drunk to stand, and I didn't know a single soul in this town I could call for help. My brother and I were all we had. I stood there, paralyzed, trying to think through the panic. What could I do? Run? Hide? Fight? I was a scrawny 12-year-old girl with no weapons, no strength, and a sick little brother depending on me. As I tried to muster the courage to peek around the corner, I heard my brother's bedroom door creak open behind me. My heart stopped. He stepped into the hallway, his small figure silhouetted in the dim light, and saw me crouched there, my face pale with terror. His eyes widened, huge and frightened, like he'd heard the growl too. I waved my hands frantically, silently begging him to go back. Thank God. He listened, slipping back into the room without a sound. I took a shaky breath and forced myself to move forward. I had to know what was out there. Slowly, I leaned just far enough to peek around the corner into the living room. What I saw still wakes me up at night, my heart racing, my body slick with sweat. A man, massive, easily 6 feet 6 inches, and over 300 pounds, was sitting on our couch. His presence filled the room, heavy and wrong. He had a wicked grin plastered across his face, his eyes glinting with something dark, something evil. That grin, that look, is burned into my memory, a nightmare I can't escape. By some miracle, he didn't see me. I pulled back, my movements agonizingly slow, terrified that even the smallest sound would draw his attention. I crept back to my brother's room, my legs trembling so badly I thought they'd give out. I eased the door shut, praying it wouldn't creak, and turned to face my brother. He was already terrified, his breath coming in short, wheezy gasps from the growling he'd heard. I could see the panic in his eyes, but I forced myself to put on what I called my brave big sister face. Kneeling in front of him, I spoke softly, calmly, even though my insides were screaming. There's a man in the living room, I said. I don't know him. We need to be super quiet, okay? I need you to be brave for me. Keep your breathing steady. You can do this. My brother idolized me, and I knew he'd try his hardest to please me. He nodded, his small body trembling, but he stayed still, clutching a blanket like to protect him. I started looking for a way out. The window was my first hope, but when I tugged at it, it wouldn't budge. It was stuck, sealed shut by years of neglect. My heart sank, but I couldn't let myself panic. Not in front of my brother. Not with that man out there. I decided to search for a weapon, remembering that my older brother, who no longer lived with us, had kept swords somewhere in the house. As I rummaged through the room, moving clothes and blankets, I heard the man's voice again, chilling and deliberate. I know you're here, you little shits. My stomach twisted into knots. The hair on my neck stood up, and a cold sweat broke out across my skin. He knew we were here. He was coming for us. Then I heard it. My brother's wheezing, louder now, the unmistakable sound of an asthma attack starting. Damn it, damn it. I rushed to his side, wrapping my arms around him. You're okay? I whispered, my voice shaking. Be brave. Focus on breathing. I've got you. But inside, I was falling apart. His inhaler was gone, his breathing treatment machine nowhere to be found. If he got worse, I didn't know how to save him. I went back to the window, yanking at it desperately, but it still wouldn't move. I was running out of time, out of options. As I tore through the room, moving blankets and clothes, I found something that felt like a lifeline. My older brother's cell phone, the one he always forgot to take with him. Relief flooded me, a tiny spark of hope. My hands shook as I dialed 911, my voice barely a whisper as I told the dispatcher what was happening. There's a man in our house, I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. We don't know him. He's huge, and he's making weird noises. My brother's sick. Please hurry. The dispatcher told me to stay on the line, to keep the phone open so she could hear what was happening. I clutched the phone like it was my only connection to safety. 5 minutes into the call, the nightmare got worse. The man started banging on our bedroom door. The sound was deafening, each thud shaking the thin wood. Our room had the only working lock in the house, but felt like nothing against his strength. He was screaming now, his voice slurred and furious. Let me in. Open the damn door. I couldn't hold it together anymore. My brave facade shattered, and I started screaming, blood-curdling, primal screams that tore from my throat. My brother was wheezing harder, his small body trembling in my arms. I held him tighter, whispering, it's okay, even though I didn't believe it. Then the banging stopped. The silence was worse. It was heavy, suffocating, like the calm before a storm. And then he laughed, a low, chilling laugh that made my skin crawl. "You know I could bust this door down in about 2 seconds, right, little girl?" he said, his voice mockingly sweet. He started knocking lightly, almost playfully, and his tone shifted, like he was trying to coax me. "Come on, just open the door. Let's talk." It was the creepiest thing I'd ever heard, his sudden calm more terrifying than his rage. Then I heard a new sound, scraping, slow and deliberate, against the door. In my 12-year-old mind, I imagined long, jagged fingernails clawing at the wood. Something monstrous. It made my blood run cold. Suddenly, the chaos erupted again. I heard shouting, new voices, sharp and commanding. "Get on the ground. Hands up. Now!" The police had arrived. There was a scuffle. The man yelling, fighting back, his voice wild and unhinged. Then silence again, but this time it felt different, like the danger was fading. A knock came at the door, gentle but firm. I was too terrified to move, convinced it was a trick, that the man was still out there. I started screaming again, "No! No! Please!" My voice was raw, my body shaking as I clung to my brother, both of us sobbing on the floor. I couldn't be brave anymore. I was just a scared kid, certain we were going to die. After a moment, a woman's voice came through the door, soft and reassuring. "It's okay, sweetheart. It's the police. You're safe now." It was a female officer. I hesitated, my heart still racing, but her voice broke through my fear. I opened the door, and there they were, 5 officers standing in the hallway, their faces a mix of concern and urgency. My brother and I ran to the female officer, collapsing into her arms, sobbing uncontrollably. We were shaking, our bodies racked with the terror we'd been holding in. She held us tightly, her presence a lifeline after the nightmare we'd endured. The police explained that the man was drunk and high out of his mind, a dangerous combination that had led him to our unlocked house. They walked me out to where he was, now in handcuffs, and asked me to stand in front of him. "Do you know this man?" they asked. I shook my head, my eyes locked on his. He was massive, his brown eyes bloodshot, and filled with a hatred that made my stomach turn. That growling noise he'd made, the wicked grin, the pure horror in my brother's eyes, it all came rushing back. I'll never forget that moment, standing in front of him, feeling so small but somehow still alive. My mom and Ian were called, and the police investigated them for leaving us alone in a house with broken doors. It was a wake-up call for my mom. She's a different person now. Sober, married to a cop, a far cry from the woman who left us that night. Years later, she told me something that made my blood run cold. The man had been carrying a huge knife. That's what he'd been scraping against the door. He also had rope, tape, and a tarp. The thought of what he might have planned still sends shivers down my spine. I don't know why he didn't break down the door. It was so thin, one kick would have done it. That question haunts me, a lingering what if that fuels my nightmares. Those nightmares still follow me. My husband doesn't understand why I get so furious when he leaves our door unlocked at night. I work third shift, and coming home to an unlocked door sends me into a panic. I have to check every room, every closet, every corner where someone could be hiding. I have 2 kids now, and I'll do anything to make sure they never experience the terror I did. That night, at 12 years old, I learned what it means to be truly helpless, and what it takes to survive for the sake of someone you love. It all kicked off when my college buddy Matt and I decided to ditch class for a day and squeeze in one last weekday dirt biking trip before winter shutdown season. We'd been craving some serious trail time, and Penn O'Reilly County was calling our names. We'd ridden in the area before, tearing up our usual spots, but this time we wanted something different. A friend had tipped us off about a lesser-known trail, one that promised a killer ride without the crowds. So, early Tuesday morning, we loaded our bikes into the truck, printed out a map of the logging roads and official dirt bike trails in the area, and hit the road. Let me be clear, we're not reckless. We only ride on public land where it's legal, and we checked that the spot was fair game. Traffic was light, so we made it to our planned parking spot in just an hour and a half. That gave us plenty of daylight to burn, which was perfect. Our bikes had headlights, and we'd agreed that a little darkness wouldn't kill our vibe if the ride stretched late. We were pumped, ready to carve up the trails and soak in the thrill. We unloaded the bikes, locked the truck, and rode along the highway's shoulder for about half a mile before turning onto an old logging road. The trailhead we were aiming for was supposedly 10 miles down this road, a winding, rutted path that hadn't seen maintenance in years. We were probably 6 or 7 miles in, kicking up dust and pushing our bikes hard, when we heard a loud, roaring engine behind us. Out of nowhere, this beat-up piece of junk truck came barreling down the road. It swerved dangerously close, nearly clipping Matt before it sped past me, too. The driver didn't even slow down, disappearing around the next curve as fast as he'd appeared. We weren't exactly crawling along. I glanced at my tachometer just before it happened, and we were hitting 37 miles an hour, pretty damn fast for a crumbling logging road. That guy was driving like a maniac. Matt pulled over to the side and killed his engine, his face red with anger. I stopped beside him, and he didn't hold back. "Did you see that damn idiot?" he shouted, his voice shaking with adrenaline. "That jerk almost killed me." We were both rattled, but we didn't want to let it ruin our day. Since we'd stopped, we took a quick break, chugged some water, and tried to shake off the near miss. After a few minutes, we fired up our bikes and got back to it, determined to find the trail and have our fun. We reached the trailhead, and let me tell you, it was worth the hassle. The trail was everything we'd hoped for, technical enough to keep us on our toes, but not so brutal it stopped being fun. The ground was damp from recent rain, giving the tires just enough grip without turning into a muddy mess. The views were unreal. Rolling hills, dense forests, and the kind of quiet you only get far from civilization. We were in our element, weaving through trees, leaning into turns and feeling the rush of the ride. After a while, we hit a fork in the trail. 2 offshoot paths branched off, one climbing up the hill we were facing, the other dropping to the right toward a small valley. Both were marked with crude hand-painted plywood signs propped against trees, reading such and such creek. We pulled out our map and figured one trail went over the hill, while the other looped down into the valley and around. Matt wanted to take the high route. I was curious about the low one. "Let's split up and meet at the creek," I suggested. He nodded, and we went our separate ways, engines roaring as we tackled our chosen paths. My ride was solid for the most part. The trail got steep and gravelly in spots, forcing me to focus on every turn, but it was manageable. As I descended into the valley, the trees thickened, forming a tunnel of green around me. Up ahead, I could see a clearing where the forest opened up, and I heard what I thought was Matt's bike in the distance. My heart lifted, thinking he'd beat me to the creek. But as I broke through the trees into the open, I realized I was dead wrong. The sound wasn't a dirt bike. It was a gas-powered generator, chugging away next to a rickety shack made of plywood and 2x4s. The structure had no windows, just a sagging overhang where an old stove was set up, hooked to the generator. A massive soup pot was boiling on the stove, and the air reeked of something sharp and chemical. Scattered around the shack were empty bleach containers, their labels faded but unmistakable. My stomach twisted as I put it together. This wasn't some innocent campsite. It looked like a damn meth lab. I killed my engine, hoping whoever was inside would hear me and know I wasn't sneaking around. I edged closer, but not too close, staying about 50 yards out. Even from that distance, the bleach smell stung my nose, and I could see steam rising from the pot. Before I could decide what to do, a guy burst out from behind the shack, a shotgun clutched in his hands. He was wild-eyed, his face twisted with rage, and he was staring at the woods on the far side of the clearing. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" he screamed, his voice echoing across the open space. At that moment, I heard Matt's bike roar to life. He came tearing out of the tree line beyond the shack, his engine screaming as he gunned it toward me, His face was pale, his eyes wide with panic. "He's got a gun!" he yelled, his voice cutting through the air. "Get the hell out of here." My heart slammed against my ribs. I kicked my bike to life. Thank God it started on the first try, spun around, and took off after Matt, back the way I'd come. I've never ridden so fast in my life, especially not on a trail that steep and technical. The gravel slipped under my tires. The trees blurred past, and every jump and turn felt like it could be my last. But somehow, we stayed upright, pushing our bikes to their limits. We didn't look back, didn't dare slow down, not with that guy and his shotgun behind us. The trail seemed to stretch on forever, every second filled with the fear that we hear that truck engine again, or worse, a shotgun blast. We made it back to the logging road, and then to the parking lot in just under an hour, our bodies shaking from adrenaline. But our relief was short-lived. The parking lot wasn't empty anymore. That same piece of junk truck was there, parked near our truck. The driver was leaning against it, staring at us with a look that made my skin crawl. We didn't say a word, just started loading our bikes as fast as we could, our hands fumbling with straps and locks. The highway was close enough that we figured he wouldn't try anything stupid, but we weren't taking chances. We jumped in the truck and peeled out, but the guy followed us. His truck stayed right on our tail, weaving through traffic for over an hour. My heart was in my throat the whole time, my eyes flicking between the road and the rear view mirror. We finally lost him at a stoplight. His truck caught behind a line of cars as we gunned it through an intersection. Even then, we didn't relax until we were sure he was gone. We called the local police as soon as we felt safe, explaining everything. The shack, the bleach, the shotgun, the guy chasing us. But they brushed us off. If we investigated every report like this, we'd never get anything done, the officer said, his voice flat. It was infuriating, but there was nothing we could do. That day changed something for us. We haven't been back to Panorama County since, and I don't think we ever will. The thrill of dirt biking isn't worth risking our lives over some strung-out guy with a shotgun and a grudge. At the hotel where I work, corporate policy mandates that properties undergo major renovations every few years, depending on the brand. It's a complete overhaul. Beds, furniture, decor, paint, trim, everything gets replaced. During this particular incident, the renovation crew was working their way up the building, floor by floor, and had reached around the 10th floor. The work was methodical, stripping rooms to their bones before rebuilding them into something fresh and modern. On this night, my manager was on duty, making his rounds through the building. I can't recall exactly what he was checking. Maybe fire extinguishers or some routine maintenance task. But he was out patrolling, walkie-talkie clipped to his belt, keeping the property in order. In the security office, the dispatcher was stationed at her desk, monitoring the phones and radios. Out of the blue, a call came in from one of the rooms. She picked up the handset, but the line was silent, just a hollow quiet that gave her pause. Assuming it was a glitch or a misdial, she hung up and went back to her work. Moments later, the phone rang again. She reached for it, but before she could answer, the call display cleared and the ringing stopped after a single chime. It was odd, but she shrugged it off, figuring it was just a faulty system. The call had come from a room on the 11th floor, one of the areas still in use above the renovation zone. Then another call came through, this time with sound. When the dispatcher answered, she was met with cacophony, like a room packed with people, their voices overlapping in a chaotic murmur. The line crackled with static, the audio fuzzy and distorted, but through the noise, she caught a faint voice. It was barely audible, but it sounded like someone saying, "Help!" The word was so soft, so unclear, that she wasn't sure she'd heard it right. Still, it was enough to raise her hackles. Not wanting to take chances, she radioed the manager, who was somewhere in the building, and told him to check the room on the 11th floor just to be safe. As she logged the call into the computer, her nerves started to creep up, the strange call lingering in her mind. Before she could dwell on it, the phone rang again, this time on the emergency line, a separate system reserved for urgent situations. The call was coming from the 12th floor. She answered, and the line was thick with static, like a storm interfering with the signal. Beneath it, she heard what sounded like a muffled party. Voices, laughter, a low hum of activity. Then, cutting through the noise, a voice screamed, "I need help." It was loud, desperate, and unmistakable. Her pulse quickened as she relayed the call to the manager, her voice tight with urgency. The manager responded over the radio, saying he was a few floors away. Instead of waiting for the elevator, he opted for the stairwell, his boots echoing as he descended to the 12th floor. When he pushed open the stairwell door, he immediately noticed something off. The 12th floor was under renovation, a fact that hadn't been fully communicated to the security team. The construction crew had moved ahead of schedule, skipping a few floors to start work early. The hallway was a mess, drop cloths, exposed drywall, tools scattered about, the air thick with the smell of sawdust and fresh paint. He radioed the dispatcher to confirm the room number, his voice steady but curious. Before heading to the room, he flagged down one of the lead maintenance workers on the floor. Safety in numbers, sure, but the maintenance guy also knew the renovation schedule and which rooms were being gutted. Together, they made their way to the room in question, navigating the cluttered hallway. When they reached it, the manager pushed the door open and stopped dead in his tracks. The room was completely torn apart. No furniture, no carpet, just bare walls and subflooring. Wires dangled from the ceiling where light fixtures had been removed. Most importantly, there was no phone. Not a single piece of electronics remained. He grabbed his walkie-talkie, not the Secret Service earpiece kind, just a standard open-channel radio, and called the dispatcher. "There's no phone in this room," he said, his tone a mix of confusion and irritation. He exchanged a glance with the maintenance guy, who looked equally puzzled. As the manager started explaining why he was there, the dispatcher's voice crackled over the radio, cutting him off. "I'm getting another call from that room right now," she said, her voice edged with disbelief. In the background, the manager could hear the faint sound of a phone ringing through her headset. He froze, his eyes darting around the empty room. "I'm telling you, there's nothing here," he repeated, his voice firmer this time. "No electronics, no phone, nothing." The maintenance guy, now visibly unnerved, pulled out his cell phone and called the security office to back him up. "This room's being worked on," he told the dispatcher. "It's empty, completely stripped." As he spoke, another call came through from the same room. The dispatcher, now frazzled, hung up with the maintenance guy and put the room's call on speaker, patching it through to the manager's radio so he could hear it for himself. The sound that came through was chilling, static, thick and hissing, with faint voices buried in the noise like a distant crowd. The manager's face paled. He didn't wait for the dispatcher to say anything else. "Screw this," he muttered to the maintenance guy, his voice low but resolute. "We're getting out of here. If someone needs help that bad, they can call the damn police." The maintenance guy didn't argue. He was already halfway out the door. They turned and left the room, their footsteps quickening as they headed back to the stairwell. The eerie call still ringing in their ears. When I heard this story later, I couldn't help but laugh, though it wasn't because I thought it was funny. It was a nervous, involuntary reaction, my brain's way of processing something I didn't know how to handle. The whole thing was just too weird, too unexplainable. A phone call from a room with no phone, static-filled voices crying for help. It didn't add up, and the manager and dispatcher had no answers. They were shaken, and honestly, so was I just hearing about it. As they were leaving the 12th floor, they spotted a housekeeper pushing her cart down the hallway. The manager flagged her down, still rattled, and asked if she knew anything about the room. Her response made my skin crawl. She said she'd gotten calls from that room before. Even when it was empty, with no guests checked in, the calls were always the same. Static, sometimes voices, sometimes just silence. She spoke about it so casually, like it was just another quirk of the job. Apparently, the hotel replaced a phone in that room regularly because guests complained about it malfunctioning. But the issue never went away. For the staff, especially the old-timers, these random calls were just part of working there. They'd gotten used to it, whether the calls were static-filled or eerily clear. I've always felt uneasy on the 12th floor, even before this incident. There's just something off about it, a heaviness in the air that I can't explain. I try to avoid it whenever I can, sticking to other parts of the hotel. But this story stuck with me, especially after a guest staying in that same room asked me something strange. He was a middle-aged guy, nothing out of the ordinary, but he pulled me aside one day and asked if the hotel had timers on the curtains. I must have looked confused because he explained that his curtains kept moving, opening or closing on their own during his stay. I told him no, we don't have anything like that. No hotel I've ever heard of puts timers on curtains. He just nodded, but the look in his eyes told me he didn't quite believe it was nothing. That room, that floor ascendingly, I can't shake the feeling that something's not right about it. The calls, the voices, the curtains, it's all too much for me to brush off. I don't know what's going on in that room, but I'm not eager to find out. This happened when I was about 14 years old, growing up in a small town in Germany with around 6,000 residents. It was a quiet place, the kind where everyone knew each other, and life moved at a slow, predictable pace. I had a boyfriend who lived in the same city as my school, about a 15-minute train ride from my hometown. After school, I'd often head straight to his place, spending afternoons at his parents' house before catching the evening train back home. It was a routine I'd grown comfortable with, even if it meant getting home late. On this particular evening, it was the end of summer, and the days were still long, with the sun lingering well into the evening. I boarded the 7:45 p.m. train from my boyfriend's city to my town, the carriage bathed in the warm, golden light of late daylight. The ride was uneventful, just a familiar hum of the train and the blur of fields passing by. By the time the train pulled into my hometown station, though, the sun had begun to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. The light was fading fast, but I wasn't worried. It was only a 10-minute walk from the station to our house, a path I'd taken countless times. Even at night, I stepped onto the platform and started walking, my sneakers scuffing against the pavement. The streets were empty, which wasn't unusual for this hour in our small town. Most people were already home, tucked away for the night. I was alone, or so I thought, until I heard a faint sound behind me, like footsteps echoing in the distance. I glanced over my shoulder and saw a tall, lanky figure dressed head to toe in black, strolling casually along the sidewalk. He was far enough away that I couldn't make out his face, but something about him sent a chill through me. He didn't seem to be following me. Not exactly, but my gut twisted with unease, a primal warning I couldn't ignore. I tried to shake it off, telling myself I was being paranoid. To play it cool, I adjusted my backpack and kept walking, forcing my steps to stay steady and relaxed. But then I remembered a trick I'd read somewhere. If you think someone's following you, cross the street to see if they do the same. It sounded clever at the time, so I casually crossed the other side of the road, glancing at a shop window to avoid looking suspicious. My heart sank when I saw him cross, too, his long legs keeping a steady pace. I crossed back to my original side, hoping I was wrong. He followed suit, mirroring my every move. There was no denying it now. This guy was definitely tailing me. He was closing the distance, not aggressively, but enough to make my pulse race. I cursed myself for trying that street crossing trick. All it had done was confirm my fears and probably tip him off that I knew he was following me. My mind raced, replaying every warning I'd ever heard about walking alone at night, but I pushed the panic down. I was almost at the bottom of the hill that led to our house. Just a short climb, a few more steps, and I'd be in our driveway, where motion sensor floodlights would light up the yard like a beacon. I could see safety ahead, and it gave me a flicker of hope. The lanky guy was still behind me, his footsteps steady and deliberate as I reached the top of the hill. My house came into view, its familiar outline of comfort against the darkening sky. I quickened my pace, my eyes fixed on the gate to our driveway. The motion sensor lights flicked on, bathing the yard in bright, reassuring light. I was so close, just a few more steps, and I'd be safe inside. I reached for the gate, my fingers brushing the latch, when suddenly he was there, right behind me. In a heartbeat, everything changed. His hand clamped onto my upper left arm, his grip like iron, yanking me back. Before I could scream, his other hand slammed over my mouth, his fingers pressing down hard on my jaw, forcing it open. The pressure was excruciating, pinning my head in place. He was stronger than he looked, his lanky frame deceivingly powerful. He started tugging at my backpack, tried to rip it off my shoulders, then grabbed at my jacket, his movements frantic and forceful. He pushed me downward, trying to force me to ground, his breath hot and ragged as he muttered words in Russian, low and breathy, like a predator closing in. For a moment, I was frozen, my mind reeling in shock. My thoughts spiraled into the darkest places. This is it. He's going to rape me right here. Drag me off somewhere, maybe traffic me to Russia. The fear was paralyzing, rooting me to the spot as his hands tore at my clothes. But then, something snapped inside me. Adrenaline surged in my veins, a raw, primal instinct to fight back. I'd been going to the gym, building strength through leg presses and workouts, and now that training kicked in. I pushed against him with everything I had, my legs straining as I resisted his attempt to shove me down. He was strong, but I was determined, and I managed to hold my ground, keeping myself upright. I tried to bite his hand, desperate to break free, but his grip on my jaw was too tight, locking my mouth open. So I did the only thing I could think of. I licked his palm, slobbering all over it, hoping it would disgust him enough to let go. It worked. His hand jerked back, and he stumbled away from me, just enough for me to spin around and face him. Our eyes locked, his face pale and shadowed in the floodlights, his expression a mix of surprise and anger. Rage boiled up inside me, drowning out the fear. "You asshole!" I screamed, my voice raw and defiant, echoing to the quiet street. To my shock, he didn't come at me again. Instead, he turned and bolted, his long legs carrying him down the hill and into the darkness. I stood there, trembling, my breath coming in sharp gasps, watching him disappear. The adrenaline that had saved me now left me shaking, my knees weak as the reality of what had just happened sank in. I fumbled for my house key, my hand so unsteady I couldn't get it into the lock. Tears streamed down my face, my jaw throbbing from his grip. In a panic, I rang the doorbell, my sobs choking out any words as my mom opened the door, her face shifting from confusion to alarm when she saw me. I collapsed into her arms, crying so hard I couldn't speak, the pain in my jaw radiating with every sob. It took a while before I could stammer out what had happened, the words tumbling out between gasps. My mom held me tightly, her own fear mirroring mine as she called the police. They told us to come to the station the next day to give a statement, their tone frustratingly calm, like this was just another report to file. When we went in, I learned something that made my blood boil. The police knew this guy. He was a local creep, infamous for lurking around town and following people. But I was the first girl he'd physically attacked. Infuriatingly, they did nothing about it. Their advice? Call us if it happens again. That was it. No arrest, no consequences, just a shrug and a suggestion to stay vigilant. The attack changed me. From that day on, I carried pepper spray everywhere, my fingers often twitching toward it whenever I felt uneasy. I'll admit, I might have been a little trigger-happy with it, spraying anyone who seemed remotely suspicious. My trust in strangers shattered. A few months later, I saw the creepy Russian guy again while walking home from a friend's house in broad daylight. My heart stopped when I spotted him, his lanky frame unmistakable even from a distance. I didn't hesitate. I turned and ran, my legs pumping until I stumbled across a family out for an afternoon walk. They must have seen the panic in my eyes because they kindly escorted me home, their presence a shield against the fear that gripped me. Looking back now, years later, I realized just how messed up that situation was. At 14, I didn't fully grasp the danger I'd been in, but as an adult, it's chilling to think about what could have happened. I'm still angry at the police for their apathy, dismissing a violent attack like it was no big deal. And I'm baffled that my mom ever let me out of her sight again, though I know she was just trying to keep life normal for me. That night left scars, not just on my jaw but on my sense of safety, a reminder of how quickly the world can turn dark when you least expect it. Years ago, when I was about 17 or 18, I was still living with my mom and stepdad in the tiny town where I grew up. It was the kind of place so small it didn't even have a single traffic light, just one local store and one pizza shop up the hill. Life there was quiet, predictable, but that day, something happened that still sends chills down my spine. It was a cold, snowy evening, and we decided to order pizza from the local shop. My mom called in the order, and as usual, I was tasked with picking it up. I bundled up against the winter chill, pulling on my boots, zipping up my warm jacket, wrapping a scarf around my neck, and tugging a hat over my ears. The snow crunched under my feet as I trudged out to my car, my breath visible in the frosty air. I started the engine, letting it warm up for a moment, and drove up the hill to the pizza place. Let me paint you a picture of this shop, because it's important. It's perched on a steep hill, right at a sharp, narrow corner of the road. The place is designed like a drive-through. There's no parking lot, just a small space in front of the shop where you pull up the window. It's not the kind of place where you linger. You get your food and go. The building itself is small, with a single window for orders and a side door that's rarely used. It's functional, no frills, the kind of spot you'd expect in a town like ours. I pulled up to the window, my car idling in the tight space, and fished out the cash from my pocket, ready to pay. The window slid open, and a thin older man with scraggly brown hair leaned out. His face was weathered, and his eyes had a sharpness that made me uneasy. He asked for the last name on the order, his voice gruff but not unfriendly. I gave him a polite smile and said our last name, expecting him to grab the pizza and be done with it. He grinned, a wide, toothy grin that felt too big for the moment, and told me the pizza wasn't ready yet. "It'll be a few minutes," he said, his eyes lingering on me. I shrugged, trying to keep things light. "Oh, okay, that's fine. No big deal. I'll just chill for a bit." I figured I'd wait in my car, maybe scroll through my phone or listen to the radio. Then he said something that made my stomach twist. "Why don't you come inside and get warm?" His voice was overly friendly, and that grin stretched even wider, showing too many teeth. I glanced at him, and that's when I noticed he was completely alone in the shop. No other employees, no customers, just him in that dimly lit space, staring at me with that unnerving smile. I forced a polite laugh, trying to brush it off. No thanks. I'll just wait in my car." My heart was starting to beat faster, but I didn't want to seem rude. This was a small town after all, and you don't just snap at people. But he didn't let it go. He asked again, leaning a little further out the window. "Come on, it's nice and warm in here. You don't want to sit out in the cold." His tone was insistent, almost pleading, and it set off every alarm in my head. This wasn't a diner or a restaurant where people hung out. This was a takeout-only pizza shop, a place where you grabbed your food and left. Customers didn't go inside, especially not teenage girls on snowy nights when the place was empty. I smiled tightly, my discomfort growing. "No, thanks," I said again, firmer this time. "I'm good." He wouldn't drop it. "It's really cold out there," he pressed, his voice taking on a slight edge. "You'd be much more comfortable inside. Just pull your car over to the side and turn it off. I'll let you in through the side door." My mind screamed, "Asterisk, what the hell? Is this guy serious?" Asterisk, there was no way I was going anywhere near that side door, let alone stepping foot inside with him. The shop was tiny, isolated, and he was acting way too eager. I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles whitening. No thanks. I repeated, my voice steady despite the panic bubbling inside me. I'm good sitting in my car. His face changed then, his grin faltered, and a flash of irritation crossed his eyes. Fine then, he muttered, slamming the window shut with more force than necessary. I let out a shaky breath, my heart pounding in my chest. The next few minutes felt like an eternity. I sat there, trying to calm myself, but I could see him through the window, pacing back and forth inside the shop. Every time he passed by, he'd glance out at me, that wide, creepy smile plastered on his face. It wasn't just a friendly smile. It was menacing, like he was enjoying how uncomfortable he was making me. I felt trapped, stuck in that small space with nowhere to go until the pizza was ready. To avoid his gaze, I pulled out my phone and pretended to be busy, scrolling aimlessly while keeping him in my peripheral vision. My skin crawled every time he walked by the window, his eyes locking onto me. I wanted to scream, just give me my damn pizza, so I can get out of here. But I kept my cool, forcing myself to stay calm, even though every instinct told me to peel out and leave. Finally, the window slid open again. He held out the pizza box and told me the total, his voice flat now like he was annoyed. I handed him the cash, my hands trembling slightly, and waited for my change. I couldn't just leave. My mom would have my head if I didn't bring back every cent. He came back to the window, holding the change in his hand. But before giving it to me, he leaned forward and said, "You should have come inside. The offer's still open, though." His tone was low, almost taunting, and that grin was back, bigger than ever. I stared at him, my jaw tightening. What the hell is wrong with you? I want to say, but instead, I just grabbed the change, my fingers brushing his for a split second that made my stomach lurch. I threw the car into gear, pulling away as fast as I could without looking reckless, the pizza box sliding slightly on the passenger seat. My heart was racing, and I could still feel his eyes on me as I drove down the hill. When I got home, I walked to the front door, the warmth of the house hitting me like a wave. My mom was in the living room, and as soon as she saw my face, she knew something was wrong. I must have looked like I'd seen a ghost. My eyes wide, my face pale, a look of pure disgust twisting my features. Then, to my embarrassment, I started to cry. The tears came out of nowhere, hot and unstoppable, rolling down my cheeks as the fear and discomfort I'd been holding in finally broke free. My mom jumped up from the couch, her face full of concern. "What happened? Are you okay?" she asked, rushing over to me. I set the pizza box on the counter and started spilling the whole story, my voice shaking as I recounted every detail. The man's creepy grin, his insistence that I come inside, the way he kept pushing even when I said no, how he paced and stared at me, and that final taunting comment about the offer still being open. The tears kept coming, and I felt like a baby for crying, but it scared me so much. I'd never felt so vulnerable, so targeted. My mom listened, her expression growing darker with every word. When I finished, she hugged me tightly, telling me it was okay and that I'd done the right thing by staying in the car. My stepdad, who'd been in the other room, overheard and came in, his face hardening as I repeated the story. He was furious, disturbed even, and immediately picked up the phone to call the pizza shop and confront the man. He dialed a number, and when the man answered, my stepdad laid into him, explaining how inappropriate and creepy his behavior had been, how he'd scared me, and how it was unacceptable to pressure a teenage girl like that. But the man, apparently the new owner of the shop, denied everything. He claimed he didn't know what my stepdad was talking about, insisted I was making it all up, and acted like the conversation never happened. My stepdad hung up, shaking his head, and turned to me. "He says it didn't happen," he said, his voice thick with disbelief. My jaw dropped. I couldn't believe it. Why would he lie? He'd said those things to me, looked at me with that awful grin, made me feel like I was in danger. And now he was pretending it never happened? My mind raced with questions. What was he planning? Why was he so desperate to get me inside? Was he just a creep? Or was there something worse he had in mind? The thought made my skin crawl. That night shook me to my core. For a long time, I refused to go back to that pizza shop. Even now, 9 years later, that man still owns a place. Every time I think about it, I wonder how many other girls he's tried to lure inside with that same creepy grin. How many times he's lied to cover his tracks. It gives me shivers just thinking about it. The memory of that snowy night, his pacing silhouette in the window, and that menacing smile still haunts me. A reminder how quickly a routine errand can turn into something terrifying. It was Halloween night, 2009, and I had just turned 21. The crisp autumn air carried the scent of fallen leaves and pumpkin spice, but I wasn't in the mood for festivities. My friend Casey, however, was buzzing with excitement about a costume-themed party she'd been invited to, and she was determined to drag me along. Normally, I'd never turn down a good party. Music, drinks, and a chance to let loose were usually right up my alley, but that night, I just wasn't feeling it. I wanted to stay home, curl up on the couch with Casey, munch on unhealthy snacks, and maybe binge watch a couple of scary movies to match the Halloween vibe. But Casey wasn't having it. She insisted we go, her enthusiasm infectious, and somehow she convinced me to get ready and join her. The party was costume-themed, but I didn't have the energy or the resources to put together an outfit. I didn't own any costumes, and the idea of scrambling to find something felt like too much effort. So I decided to go as myself, jeans, a sweater, and a half-hearted smirk. Scary enough, I figured. Casey, on the other hand, was all in. She was frantically texting Alex, her ex-boyfriend who was supposed to pick us up, while trying to figure out where she could grab a last-minute costume. She had her heart set on finding a cool mask to make up for not having a full outfit. Desperate, she called around to check if any Halloween stores were still open, but it was getting late, and her options were dwindling. About 45 minutes later, Alex texted Casey to let us know he was outside. We grabbed our things and headed out to his car, the chilly night air nipping at my skin. As soon as we opened the car door, we were hit with a wave of Alex's cologne. He'd clearly gone overboard with it, the scent overwhelming but oddly comforting in its familiarity. "Hey, Alex," I said, sliding into the back seat. Casey hopped in the front, already chatting away. Alex and Casey had been on and off for 3 years before finally calling it quits for good, but they'd managed to stay close friends, which was rare and kind of admirable. Their easy banter filled the car as we drove, making the night feel a little less heavy. On the way, Alex mentioned that he'd passed by a Halloween store on his route to pick us up, but it was already closed. He'd even Googled a few other places, but no luck. Everything was shut down for the night. Casey's face fell. She'd been so excited about finding a mask to wear to the costume party. "Great," she muttered, slumping back in her seat. "I'm going to a costume party with no costume." But Casey being Casey, she shook it off quickly, her mood bouncing back as she started hyping herself up for the party. When we pulled up to the house, the scene was exactly what I'd expected. A rowdy group of drunk college kids spilling out onto the front porch, red Solo cups in hand, their laughter echoing into the night. The house was decked out for Halloween. Fake cobwebs draped over the bushes, jack-o'-lanterns flickering on the steps, and thumping music pouring from inside. I took one look at the chaotic crowd and immediately regretted coming. This is going to be a trashy mess, I thought, already picturing sticky floors and bad decisions. But Casey grabbed my arm, her eyes sparkling with excitement, and pulled me inside before I could protest. To my surprise, the party turned out to be a blast. The energy was contagious. People were dancing, joking, and showing off their costumes, which ranged from hilarious to downright bizarre. I loosened up, letting myself get swept away by the vibe. A few shots of something sweet and strong later, the buzz hit me hard, and before I knew it, my cautious buzz had morphed into full-on drunkenness. I was laughing chatting with strangers, and actually having fun way more than I'd expected. At some point, Casey and I decided we needed a break from the chaos. Like most girls at a party, we made our way upstairs to the bathroom to touch up our makeup and, naturally, to gossip about the cute guys we'd spotted. The upstairs was quieter, the music muffled by the walls, and the air felt a little less stifling. We found the bathroom, a small space with flickering fluorescent light, and Casey started digging through her purse for her makeup. "Leave the door open," she said, glancing at me. I get claustrophobic, and it's hot as hell in here. I nodded, propping the door open with my foot. The heat was probably a mix of the crowded house and the alcohol warming my skin, but I didn't argue. It felt good to have some air. We were in the middle of our gossip session, giggling about some guy in a vampire costume who'd been flirting with Casey, when something caught our attention. A guy stumbled out of a room down the hall, what I assumed was the master bedroom, given its size and the double doors. He was dressed as a butcher, his costume complete with a stained apron and fake blood splattered across it. The blood looked so realistic, smeared across his chest and stomach. But oddly, he wasn't carrying a cleaver, which would have tied the whole look together. He was clutching his stomach with one hand, the other sliding along the wall for support as he staggered through the hallway, his steps unsteady. Our eyes met for a brief moment, his face pale and his expression unreadable, before he continued toward the stairs. Casey and I froze, our conversation halting as we watched him. "Whoa," Casey whispered, her eyes wide. "That guy's costume is intense." I nodded, equally impressed. The blood, the way he was stumbling, it looked so real, like he was fully committed to playing the part of a wounded butcher. "He's really selling it," I said, a little drunk and a lot amused. I mean, it was Halloween. People went all out for their costumes, right? Butchers didn't exactly stumble around bleeding in real life, so I figured he was just hamming it up for the party. I was too tipsy to overthink it, and honestly, I was enjoying the mini performance he was putting on. I called out to him, slurring slightly, "Hey, cool costume, nice acting." But he didn't respond. He didn't even look back, just kept shuffling toward the stairs, one hand still pressed to his stomach. Casey and I shrugged it off, turning back to the mirror. "Rude," she muttered, but we were already distracted, laughing and reapplying lip gloss. The moment passed, and we got back to our gossip, the butcher guy fading from our minds. When we were done, we headed toward the stairs, ready to rejoin the party. That's when we noticed the mess he'd left behind. There was blood everywhere, smudged handprints on the wall, streaks on the floor, even a few drops trailing down the hallway. "Damn," I said, shaking my head. "That guy went all out. Sucks for whoever lives here. They've got a hell of a cleanup job." Casey laughed, stepping carefully to avoid the fake blood. "Not to mention the mess downstairs," she added, gesturing toward the chaos we knew was waiting below. We figured the host would be scrubbing red corn syrup out of the carpet for days. Downstairs, the party had thinned out. It was around 2 a.m., and most people had either left or crashed on the couches, sprawled out with empty cups still in their hands. The energy had shifted from wild to sleepy, and I was starting to feel the weight of all those shots. Casey pulled out her phone to text Alex, asking where he was so he could take us home. He replied that he was out on the front porch, smoking a cigarette, and told us to come outside if we were ready to leave. We grabbed our jackets and headed out, weaving through the stragglers and stepping over spilled drinks. The next day, I woke up with a pounding headache and a vague memory of the night before. My phone buzzed with a text from Casey, asking if I remembered the butcher guy we'd seen upstairs. "Yeah," I replied, my mind flashing back to his bloody apron and dramatic stumbling. "Why?" What she told me next hit me like a punch to the gut, and even now, it haunts me. Casey said a friend of hers knew the guy and had filled her in on what really happened. Apparently, the butcher guy had gotten into a heated argument with a friend of his in the master bedroom. Something about drugs, though the details were fuzzy. The argument turned physical, and the two of them started fighting, throwing punches and causing a scene. The butcher guy had done some serious damage to his friend, beating him up pretty badly. But then, in a moment of desperation or rage, the friend pulled out a knife and stabbed him. When we saw the butcher guy stumbling out of that room, clutching his stomach, it wasn't fake blood on his apron. It wasn't part of his costume, and he wasn't acting. He'd been stabbed, bleeding out, fighting for his life as he staggered through the hallway. His friend, the one who stabbed him, was still in the master bedroom, badly injured from a fight. The blood on the walls, the handprints, the trail on the floor, it was all real. My stomach churned as Casey's words sank in. I'd seen a real stabbing, witnessed someone bleeding out, and I thought it was just a Halloween prank. Normally, I'd faint at the sight of blood. Real blood made me queasy, always had. But that night, I was so drunk and so convinced it was fake that I'd brushed it off, even complimented the guy on his performance. The thought that the stabber was still in that room, just feet away from where Casey and I were standing, made my skin crawl. What if we'd walked in? What if we'd gotten caught up in whatever mess they'd started? I don't know much about what happened after that night. Casey heard that the butcher guy survived, thank God, but she wasn't sure about his friend, whether he made it or not, or what kind of shape he was in. The whole situation was a blur of rumors and half-truths, and I didn't want to dig deeper. All I know is that I'm beyond grateful I didn't stumble into that bedroom or get any closer to whatever was going on. That night, I'd been inches away from something truly horrific, and I hadn't even realized it until it was over. The memory of that blood, so real, so vivid, still sends shivers down my spine, a reminder how a fun Halloween party turned into a nightmare I'll never forget.